We're a little over a week away from a very solid UFC Noche fight night card with a main event that I'm absolutely hyped for with Diego Lopes taking on John Silva. And so in today's video, I'm going to be doing a full card breakdown, main card, and the prelims, giving my winner pick and how I think they get it done. If you guys want the timestamps for every matchup, those are going to be in the description. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. But let's just dive right into it here. We are starting off on the prelims with Santiago Luna taking on Quang. This is a fight taking place at bantamweight, and this is going to be Luna's UFC debut. He's still very raw in the sport. He's only 21 years old, pretty big physically for the bantamweight division. He only has 6 pro fights, 6-0 record, all finishes, 2 knockouts, 4 submission wins. He is just very, very untested. Even in those 6 pro fights, it's not like, he's going up against super strong pre-UFC competition. Very untested, like I kind of said. Like, he's very raw, he's young. I don't think we know exactly what level he's at right now, just based on the competition he's been going up against. On the feet, he does have some pop, but he's also a little bit hittable. Not the most technical striker. Obviously, he has some decent submission skills with those 4 sub wins in his 6 pro fights. On the other side here with Quang, he went into his last UFC fight needing a win. He started off 0-2 in the promotion, was going up against Gaston Bolaños, who in his previous fight had showcased some really solid defensive grappling. Quang went in there, just dominated him on the ground, ended up finding the submission win. And so I do think Lee's going to come into this fight. He's going to want to wrestle. He's averaging 3.2 takedowns per 15 minutes so far in the UFC. And even though he's going to want to wrestle, it's not like he's a complete zero on the feet. Couple of nice knockouts against like decent levels of competition before he got into the UFC. He's 33 years old. He has a lot more experience. And so while I do think Luna probably has the higher ceiling in the sport, the dude's only 21 years old. He has, a ton of room to grow. I do think as of right now, I just trust Quang a little bit more. The experience, he's been in some close fights with, some higher level fighters than Santiago Luna's ever faced off against. So I'm going to pick Quang by decision. Now moving into this next matchup, we have 2 guys making their UFC debuts. We have Rodrigo Sezinando taking on Daniil Donchenko. This is a fight up at welterweight. For Rodrigo, he has a pro record of 8-1. 7 of those are finishes, 4 knockouts, 3 submission wins. He is a little bit wild, kind of as a reckless style. He's not super fast on the feet, but he does hit hard. He's going to wing big shots. He's not afraid of getting clipped. He will eat one to land one. I think it was actually his most recent fight. Like, it was just a straight up brawl. He dropped this dude at least a couple of times in the first round, was really just winging these shots, completely left the defense at home, but he did end up finding the knockout finish. On the other side here with Donchenko, like I said, also his debut, 11-2 pro record, 7 knockout wins, 2 submissions, 2 decisions. He's a very well-rounded fighter. I do think, technically, I think he's going to be the sharper fighter in this matchup. I also think, though, that he's going to be a little bit more limited as an athlete. His explosiveness, the power, it didn't really pop when I watched his fights. Whereas with Rodrigo, he has that power. He can certainly hurt you, but he's also a lot looser on the feet, not super defensively responsible. So I am going to side with Daniil Donchenko here. Now, if he went out there, just kind of got starched early on, I wouldn't be shocked, but I think he can weather an early storm. I think Sezinando is going to fade, especially if he just exerts a ton of energy early in fights like we've kind of seen. So I'm going to go with Daniil Donchenko to pick up a decision win and his first UFC dub. Then a really fun matchup here down at flyweight. We have Alessandro Costa taking on Alden Coria. Costa has a 2-2 UFC record, but he has finishes against Kevin Borjas and Jimmy Flick. And then you look at his 2 losses. They are to Amir Albazi and Steve Erceg. So 2 guys that are locked into the rankings. The fight with Steve Erceg was fairly competitive. He won a round. It's not like Erceg just ran away from him. So 2-2 record, but I do think he's better than, a 500 record would kind of imply here. He's super explosive. He's going to throw big shots on the feet. Really impressive leg kicks. We saw in both of his wins against Borjas and Flick, he completely beat them down with the leg kicks. And those are the sequences that ended up leading to his finishes. Costa's proven himself against pretty legit competition, hanging in there with some ranked dudes, picking up finishes over guys, who could stick around within the UFC. On the other side here with Coria, this is his UFC debut, 10-3 pro record. He is a pretty fun striker. He fights from both stances. has solid boxing, had a really nice knee knockout in a fight where his opponent was, I think, a credentialed wrestler, was really trying to grapple him. Wasn't having a ton of success, I think, in like the first round and a half, but they were like kind of in like these nullified positions, like these 50-50 spots, ended up getting stood up from there, but he baited out a shot. He threw like a slapping lead hook, followed it up with a knee up the middle, put this dude out cold. It was super impressive, so the knees are nice. Also works in elbows. He throws it well in combination. Like I mentioned, he can kind of be clinched, held down a little bit, but he was able to mitigate a lot of the damage that he was taking in those positions. He's not great defensively if you do pressure him and kind of push him backwards. I think that could be something we see in this matchup against Costa, who is probably going to come out and be very aggressive. I'm going to give the edge to Costa here. I like his track record against like proven solid UFC levels of competition. For Coria, right, this is a huge step up in comp. I think Costa's going to break him down in the first round, and I think he ends up finding the round 2 knockout. I think the leg kicks could be a big part of that, like we've seen in his first 2 wins. Then going all the way up to middleweight, we have Reese taking on Sedriques Dumas. I think this was a fight that was booked maybe like 1 fight ago for these dudes. They end up getting it rebooked here. And these are 2 guys that are both pretty tough to trust just in like their given performance from fight to fight. Both have pretty much only beaten low levels of competition within the UFC. Reese does have a 3-2 record. He's coming off a decision win against Dusko Todorovic. He's a pretty good athlete for the weight class. He's 6'4" with a 77-inch reach. He can finish fights on the feet and on the mat. Does have some questionable takedown defense, 57%. And he has been knocked out in both of his UFC losses against Cody Brundage and Azamat Bakoyev. And both of those knockouts were set up with him, being susceptible to the takedown. For Brundage, he got taken down. I think that was the slam KO where he maybe tried to go for a triangle or an armbar, and Brundage just slammed him, finished him there. The Bakoyev finish was set up by a takedown, and then he just landed a ton of ground and pound and got the finish that way. For Sedriques Dumas, he has a 3-3 UFC record, but those 3 wins are all decisions against Brundage, Zaitar, Tululin, just, pretty low levels of competition, at least in terms of the guy he's beating. And then in his 3 losses, he has been finished in all 3 of them. He has also kind of struggled with his grappling defense, 40% takedown defense, not great. I do think this is a fight where I probably just prefer Reese wherever it takes place. On the feet, I do think he's more dangerous. When it comes to the grappling, I also think he's probably the better grappler, so I am going to lean towards Reese picking up the win here. He's an explosive guy, does have some power. I'm going to go round 1 knockout, but this also wouldn't be shocking if this was just kind of like a gross, like sloppy 3-round decision. So hopefully there's an early finish, but I could also see it not being the most entertaining fight in the world. Then we're going to go all the way down to women's strawweight, where we have Tatiana Suarez taking on Amanda Lemos. Suarez coming off a really tough fight. She was outclassed by Zhang Weili in her title opportunity. That was the only pro loss of her career. She has pretty much cruised past every other opponent she has gone up against. She is an elite grappler, averages nearly 5 takedowns per 15 minutes, hits those takedowns at a high rate, 47% takedown accuracy. And that's with a lot of matchups against like women that are pretty high ranked at 115 or 125. For Amanda Lemos, she does, have some real pop for 115. She's landed knockdowns in 5 of her 9 UFC wins. She is coming off a decision win against Yasmin Lucindo. Not a super impressive performance. She went grappling heavy in the first couple of rounds, then got controlled in the third, but there was just very minimal damage, all across the board in those 3 rounds. She has shown just like a real grappling hole, only a 59% takedown defense. In her last 3 losses, she was submitted by Virna Jandiroba. Zhang Weili racked up 16 minutes of control time in their title fight, and then she was also submitted by Jessica Andrade. And then even in some of the wins, like we have seen her get control grappled. I just don't think this is a good matchup for Amanda Lemos. I know Suarez did not look great in that Zhang Weili fight, but really no one looks great against Zhang Weili. So I do think Tatiana Suarez is going to show levels here. And with Zhang Weili moving up and like vacating 115, I think it's very possible, like actually very likely that Tatiana Suarez ends up holding that belt, picks up a win here, might be fighting for the title. I'm going to go round 1 submission win. It could go into the second, but I do think Suarez is going to get her down. And when she gets her there, I just don't trust Amanda Lemos' submission defense. So round 1 submission will be the pick. Next up, we are going to have Jose Medina taking on Dusko Todorovic. This is a middleweight fight. I just don't think Medina is a UFC caliber fighter. He is 0-2 in the UFC. He lost in his opportunity on the Contender Series. He has an 11-5 pro record. He only has 3 wins against guys with winning records, and those guys' records were 4-2, 2-0, and 2-1. So he has not beaten anyone who's like decent at all. He's been out-grappled and outstruck across his 3 UFC fights. They have not been super competitive. I think the best kind of thing you could say about him is he is tough. He's fairly durable, but as you know, like if during a fight, the announcers are talking about how tough you are, you know, how you're going out on your shield, that means you are getting your ass kicked. And so for Jose Medina here, I just don't have a ton of confidence in him. Now, it's not like Dusko Todorovic is just like some sort of marauder who will just run through anyone. He is kind of kill or be killed. Like 11 of his 12 wins are by finish. He's been knocked out in 4 of his 6 losses, but he is riding a 3-fight losing streak. So the matchmaking kind of lines up here, but at least Dusko has beaten like some competent fighters. He has 3 wins in the UFC, even if they're not against, you know, the best strength of schedule within the promotion. He also has a knockout win against Michel Pereira before he got into the UFC. So like he's at least beaten some real dudes, and you just cannot say the same about Medina. So I think Dusko's going to get the finish here. I'll go round 2 knockout. Like I said, Medina is pretty tough. Dusko's a finisher, so maybe round 1 Medina survives, but I think Dusko ends up finding the knockout in the second round. Then at lightweight, we are going to have Claudio Puelles taking on Joaquim Silva. And for Puelles here, he's just been very inactive over the last few years. He has not won a fight since April of 2022. He has only fought 2 times since that last win. He is very one-dimensional. He needs the fight to get to the ground. He is a dangerous submission threat. Ground and pound, not super dangerous. His last fight against Faraz, he landed 7 takedowns, racked up 7 minutes of control time, and only landed 4 significant strikes. So he's going to want the fight on the ground. He's going to want to turn this into a grappling match, but it's not like he's super scary once he gets you there, at least from like, you know, a landing damage perspective. 3 of his 5 wins in the UFC are by submission. 7 of his 12 pro wins are by sub. On the other side here with Joaquim Silva, he has a 6-5 UFC record, has faced like some very solid, competition in the UFC. This is a pretty big layoff for him. His last fight was May of 2024. He's really not bringing a ton to the table from like a grappling perspective. Averages under half a takedown per 15 minutes. Decent takedown defense at 69%. In some of his recent fights, like Clay Guida, went 2 for 11, racked up nearly a round of control time. Drakkar Klose went 0 for 7 on his takedowns, but did rack up like 5 minutes of control time, just holding him against the cage in the clinch. And then Arman, had success 4 for 5 with 9 minutes of control time, but I'm not going to be comparing the grappling of Arman Tsarukyan to Claudio Puelles here. So for Silva, he does have power on the feet. He dropped Drakkar Klose in that 3rd round. He had Arman hurt on the feet. 3 of his 6 UFC wins are by knockout. And so I can see Claudio Puelles kind of wearing on Joaquim Silva with the grappling. Even if he's not doing a ton of damage, I can just see him kind of controlling position, and eventually that starts to wear on the gas tank of Silva. But I could also see the path in this fight where if Silva, is super aggressive in not getting taken down, not susceptible to getting clinched, Puelles can kind of turn into a sitting duck on the feet like we saw in just like that terrible performance against Dan Hooker. So I could see this fight going both ways. I am going to slightly lean towards Puelles here just to have some success with the grappling and mitigate some of the offense on the feet coming back at him. But I do think it's competitive. I think it's probably going to be a fight that's not super exciting, where it's one of those where, like, even if you don't have a rooting interest, you're just kind of rooting for the guy who's getting held against the cage or pinned down but taking minimal damage to get up and find the finish in one of those, small windows where they are on the feet. I think that is kind of how this could play out, but I am going to lean towards Puelles picking up a decision win. Then at bantamweight, we are going to have Alice Pereira taking on Montserrat Rendon. This is a women's bantamweight fight. This is Pereira's UFC debut. This is not Alex Pereira's sister. That is, I believe, Eileen Pereira. So Alice Pereira, not the same fighter. She is 5-0. She's only 19 years old. So very, very young, very green in the sport. She has picked up finishes in 4 of those 5 wins, 3 knockouts, 1 submission, but we're not going to pretend like she's going up against, super strong competition pre-UFC. She does have a big frame. She's 5'10", so definitely going to be the taller woman in this matchup. She's not the sharpest, most technical striker, but she is pretty explosive. She's aggressive, And from what I saw in like the pieces of fights I could, get from her, she does seem to be competent in the grappling department. And I do think she's going to be tested there because Rendon is 1-1 in the UFC, but she is going to want to grapple. She has racked up at least 3 takedowns and a round of control time in both of her UFC fights. She has a 54% takedown accuracy in those 2 matchups. So she's getting the takedowns. She's finding a way to get some control time, but she doesn't have a ton of finishing upside. She's actually not finished a single fight in her pro career. So I'm going to go with Alex Pereira here. I do think she's way more dangerous on the feet, has more upside to actually have these big moments in these matchups. And I'm going to trust her takedown defense enough that she can pick up the win in this fight. Then we're actually going to go down in weight to men's flyweight, where we have Jesus Aguilar taking on Luis Gurule. For Aguilar, he has a 3-2 UFC record. He just has a really weird skill set where I think 7 of his 11 wins are by submission, but 5 of them are by guillotine, and his takedown defense is really poor. So it's only at 40% in the UFC. So it's pretty much like if he's getting taken down, he is going to try to submit you. And if he doesn't get that, then you can kind of rack up control time against him. We saw that in his most recent fight against Rafael Estevam. Estevam racked up 9 minutes of control time. He was controlled for 3 minutes on the Contender Series, 4 minutes against Tetsuro Taira, who finished him in the first round, 9 minutes against Mateusz Mendoza. And it's not like when he gets to the feet, he's like, some sort of amazing striker. It's just a weird combination of skills where you think if, his submission game was so strong, he'd be a better overall grappler. Hasn't really been the case. For Gurule, he made his UFC debut against Ode Osborne, was finished in that fight, but Ode looked really good against Steve Erceg. He's dangerous. Obviously has a ton of power, especially in the first couple of rounds. I think Gurule overall is just a pretty well-rounded, solid fighter. He's composed on the feet, doesn't really overextend with his hands, did get caught in like a weird spot trying to throw a kick against Ode Osborne where he got finished, but his boxing is pretty solid. He mixes up his targets. He was a collegiate wrestler, was kind of out-wrestled pretty badly on the Contender Series, but I do think he could showcase some of that wrestling in this matchup. And then finishing upside, he's not the most powerful, most explosive dude. I don't see him finishing a lot of fights in the UFC, but that doesn't mean he can't pick up wins here in their promotion. So I kind of feel like Gurule is just better all around in this matchup. I think the big thing is if he does try to wrestle, he just can't get caught in the gilly. And that is a concern because it is, a legit weapon for Jesus Aguilar here. I'm going to go with Luis Gurule by decision. I do think he ends up getting his first UFC dub. Then at lightweight, I think this one was announced pretty recently. We have Alexander Hernandez taking on Diego Ferreira. These guys were supposed to fight on the same card. Hernandez picked up the win. I think it was UFC 319, the KO against Chase Hooper. Ferreira was supposed to fight Bobby Green. Green got sick, couldn't fight. So they both kind of get, quick turnarounds from their last scheduled fight. For Hernandez, he picked up his first finish since 2021. He's primarily a striker, but does have the ability to mix it up if he wants to. We have seen cardio has been an issue where if you really push the pace, he can kind of fade later in fights. But I think in that department, he has held up better. I also think just no longer cutting down to 145 is kind of a big thing for him in terms of like the cardio and just not killing yourself before you actually step in the cage. For Diego Ferreira, he's had like a really interesting UFC career where he has just fought a ton of really, really tough dudes. Like he took on Beneil Dariush and Dustin Poirier in his 3rd and 4th UFC fights. After those fights, he went on a 6-fight win streak, which included wins against OAM, Jared Gordon, Rustam Khabilov, and Mairbek Taisumov, and then also Anthony Pettis. So like really, really strong win streak there. Then he had 3 straight losses to Dariush, Gregor Gillespie, and then Mateusz Gamrot, but he has gone 2-1 since. He's got kind of a funky skill set where he's not super slick on the feet. He's kind of slow, but he does have a lot of pop. Like if he hits you clean, you can go out like we saw in his fight against Michael Johnson. His takedown defense is not great. He can be controlled on the ground, but he's also a very slick offensive grappler. So like you taking him down isn't the end of the world in his mind. And then he does have very good ground and pound if he can get on top. He is getting up there in age. He's 40 years old. So you don't know how much he's going to diminish fight after fight. I think this is going to be a competitive matchup. Both these guys can kind of get into these super close back and forth scraps. I'm going to slightly lean towards Diego Ferreira here. The win against Rebeski was pretty solid. Obviously, he had the KO win against Michael Johnson. Hernandez is also on a roll here, 3-fight win streak. I do think it's going to be very close, but my gut is just telling me to lean towards Ferreira here. I think he's going to like slightly win the war of attrition and end up picking up the decision win. Then we're going to go up to middleweight where we have Kelvin Gastelum taking on Dustin Stoltzfus. And this matchmaking honestly just kind of made me sad. And the sad part about it is it's not like it's all that crazy for the UFC to actually make this fight, which is the bummer because like Kelvin Gastelum, 5-6 years ago, was fighting Israel Adesanya in like a fight of the year title fight. Now he is 3-7 in his last 10, but he has still shown that he can beat these guys that are not in the top 15. Those 3 wins are against Chris Curtis, Daniel Rodriguez, Ian Heinisch. They've kind of been the matchups where they're like, all right, you have to put your ranking on the line. You have to fight outside the top 15. And for the most part, he has been able to win those matchups. Obviously, the same concerns are still there. He's very undersized for middleweight. He's 5'9" with a 71-inch reach. Still has showcased the durability. Like, the dude can get hurt, but good luck actually getting him out of there. He was dropped twice by Joe Pyfer, ate some big shots. Still, lived to see the final bell. On the other side here with Stoltzfus, he has a 3-6 UFC record, but he has gone 3-3 in his last 6, which include finishes against Puna Soriano and Marc-Andre Barrio. Also in his most recent fight against Nursultan Ruzaboyev, a fight he lost, he did actually have him hurt pretty badly in that first round, but ended up, seeing the end of the first, and then he ended up losing the second and third round. I do think he's going to want to grapple. 6 of his 16 wins are by submission. He has a 41% takedown accuracy, and he averages over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. In this matchup, I do think Kelvin Gastelum should just be the better fighter. Unfortunately, he hasn't had a ton of finishing upside as of late, hasn't landed a knockdown since 2018, so I have a tough time picking him by finish, but I do think he's going to be able to defend the wrestling. I think he's going to be the better striker. I'm going to pick Kelvin Gastelum by decision. Now we're going to have a lightweight fight between Jared Gordon and Rafa Garcia. For Jared Gordon here, he is 3-2 with 1 no contest in his last 6 fights. You could make the case that he should be like 6-0 in those last 6 fights. He has had some really tough luck. He was robbed in the fight against Paddy Pimblett. He had the no contest against Bobby Green, where Bobby Green headbutt KO'd him in a fight that Jared Gordon was looking really good in. He had a very close, somewhat controversial split decision loss to Nasrat Haqparast. And then he is coming off a round 1 KO against Thiago Moises, where he's really shown some finishing upside in the last couple of fights. Jared Gordon's always going to be a tough out. He has good cardio. Like I mentioned, he has showed the KO power as of late. He can also mix in the grappling if that's advantageous to him. And then he has really only lost to very solid competition within the UFC. For Garcia here, he has won 3 of his last 4. He is coming off a unanimous decision win against Vince Pichel. He is very boxing heavy on the feet, wants to push his grappling. 8 of his 16 wins are by submission, but he only has 1 finish in the UFC in his 5 UFC wins. I am expecting this fight to be pretty competitive. Jared Gordon doesn't necessarily have the skill set where he's just completely pulling away and outside of the last couple of fights, just going out and starching dudes. But I do trust Jared Gordon in these grinded out fights where maybe he gets taken down, but he's going to get back up and he's not going to fade and he's going to push a solid pace for 3 rounds. I think that type of fight, suits Jared Gordon pretty well. I'm going to pick him here by decision. Then I believe this is the co-main event. We have Rob Font taking on David Martinez. I'm not quite sure if this has actually been officially announced by the UFC, but it does seem like this fight is happening. So if it doesn't, I guess just keep it moving to the next matchup. But Rob Font, David Martinez, this was supposed to be Rob Font taking on Raul Rosas. Rosas had to pull out. We have David Martinez stepping in here. Rob Font is coming off of back-to-back wins where he was defending his spot in the rankings, first against Kyler Phillips and then a short notice replacement against Jean Matsumoto. We know he has very clean boxing, good cardio. If you're just going to be in a stand-up boxing fight, Adrian Yanez found out that that's just not a good recipe to pick up the win against Rob Font. He has, been working on his grappling. You could kind of tell in the Jean Matsumoto fight that's been an issue as of late. I will say in that Matsumoto fight, it did seem like he had been working on the jiu-jitsu aspect, he was kind of submission hunting, but I don't know if that's the best strategy, right? I'd be more comfortable with him just working to get up as soon as possible just to get back on the feet so we can use that boxing. But, you're seeing some sort of improvements in his fights. For David Martinez, he is 12-1 as a pro, very dangerous striker. 10 of his 12 wins are by knockout. Picked up a round 1 KO in his UFC debut. He has a ton of lateral movement. He's constantly going to be circling around the cage, mixing in a lot of kicks. I just feel like this is a really big step up in competition. We've really only seen Font lose to like some of the best dudes in the world. I don't see him getting his grappling tested, which I kind of feel like is the path for someone like outside the top 15 to really upset him. I think the UFC knew what they were doing, booking him against Raul Rosas. If you wanted to give Rosas that push, like this is the matchup where you could see him going in and having some success in the grappling department. For a striker versus striker, I'm going to lean towards Rob Font here. I don't think he's going to find the finish, but I do think he is going to pick up the decision win. And then the final fight, the main event that I am super excited for, Diego Lopes defending his spot against Jean Silva. Lopes obviously coming off the title loss to Volkanovski. He pretty much is dangerous wherever the fight goes. He has big power on the feet. He's very dangerous in the clinch, has great jiu-jitsu if the fight does hit the mat. He's also durable. The cardio was somewhat of a question mark going into that title fight. I'm not going to pretend like he has the best 5-round cardio. Like he certainly was looking, a little bit exhausted towards the end of that matchup, but it didn't really affect his fight style. He was still pushing the pace, being the aggressor. So I feel like he kind of quieted some of the narratives about him not having the best cardio in that title matchup. I think the biggest kind of hole in Diego Lopes's game is he doesn't have the wrestling to get the fight to the ground for him to actually use his jiu-jitsu. Like his jiu-jitsu kind of has to be opportunistic. It's kind of like the Brian Ortega problem where it's like, yeah, he's super dangerous, but he can't consistently get the fight there. Where Lopes kind of differs from Ortega is that he does have that danger factor on the feet where even against, some very good strikers, some great strikers like an Alexander Volkanovski, he can find that big shot and really put Volk in danger like we saw, and I think it was like late in the second round of their title matchup. On the feet, he's not super polished. He does kind of tense up. He wings these big shots. Also not great defensively, like doesn't move his head a ton, but you still always have to be, wary of him on the feet because if he lands that one shot, you could be going out. Now looking at Jean Silva, I'm very high on Jean Silva. I think he is going to be a future champ. He's 5-0 in the UFC. All 5 of those wins are by finish, coming off a very impressive performance against Bryce Mitchell, where not only did he kind of pass like the grappling test, but it was the way he did it where it was like he was either completely stuffing the takedown or he was threatening with some sort of submission, and we ended up seeing him submit Bryce Mitchell, which is a super impressive win to have on your resume, especially with just like that method of victory. On the feet, this is obviously where he gets his most work done. He's a very dangerous striker. He hits very hard. He has good kicks. He's super explosive, a nasty left hook. Also fairly patient. Like he's going to throw these big shots, but he doesn't fight with like crazy urgency where like he fights at a pace that I think is unrealistic over 5 rounds. Like if you're not going to give him an opening, he's not going to force things. I do think it's somewhat fair to question the 5-round cardio just because we haven't seen it yet, whereas we have with Diego Lopes. I think if this fight takes place on the feet, which I do think that's, primarily where it's going to take place, I think Silva is just the way better striker. I think he's tougher to hit. I think he's a little bit more technical. I think he can, really dart in and out of range, land these big shots. But Jean Silva's style also does kind of exert a lot of energy, big explosive movements. He's also kind of like always showboating. He's doing stuff where maybe he's not, racking up a ton of volume on the feet, but like the dude's always moving around. He's messing around. And like I said, he is kind of unproven over 5 rounds. And Diego Lopes is very durable. So I could see a scenario where Silva kind of pulls ahead early on, lands some big shots, maybe hurts Diego Lopes. But if Lopes can weather that storm, maybe Silva just kind of like wilts and fades as the fight goes on. With that being said, I'm still going to pick Jean Silva in this matchup. I do think he's going to be a future champ. I think he is Volkanovski's clear, like toughest test, just with the specific skill set he does bring and the power on the feet. And so I'm going to pick Jean Silva to finish this fight. I'm going to go round 2 knockout. I think Diego Lopes is hittable, and even though his chin is very strong, at some point you meet some of these dudes who just have that different power, and they're going to hurt you. I think Silva has that finishing upside. I'm going to pick him by round 2 knockout. but I do think this fight is going to deliver. If it does go the distance, I certainly would not be complaining. But that is going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you have some different picks, would love to hear them. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.